Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, you hear me. This is the moderator's app, so if you have questions, I will see them on my screen. So we have a two-part discussion. We have about half an hour of dialogue on the panel, and then about 15 minutes in questions. And depending if there's more, I will transit earlier to the questions. My name is Michiel Scheffer. I'm the president of the board of the EIC, and I have three important partners for us. I have two beneficiaries, or laureates, how we call them, and Samira is a program manager. So I will start with Samira to introduce briefly each of the speakers we have for you today. Samira.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I'm Samira. I'm the program manager for quantum tech and electronics at EIC, and I'm looking through the quantum portfolio of EIC from Pathfinder, earlier stage research, transition, and up to accelerator, where we have a large number of startups and also scale-up possibilities. Happy to be here for the discussions. Thanks.
Elena?
Hello, everyone. So I'm Eleni Diamanti. I'm co-founder and scientific advisor of the startup company Welinq that is based in Paris, and it was founded in 2022. I'm also an academic, CNRS research director at Sorbonne University. So maybe I can say a couple of words about Welinq. So Welinq is developing, so it's in the field of quantum technologies. It's a leader in quantum networking, where quantum networking means that you use quantum interconnections for two directions, for modular quantum computing, which means to interconnect quantum processing units with different modalities. And so this is, for example, to be integrated in quantum data centers. And this is the topic of the EIC accelerator grant that was granted to Welinq. And then the other direction where quantum communication and networking is important is for long distance deployment in optical fiber infrastructures. And there, for both of these cases, the building block is a quantum memory, which is a device that can store information, and so it can be used as a buffer and a synchronization element for quantum networks.
And just be precise, you used two instruments of the EIC?
Yeah.
Pathfinder.
Not Pathfinder, transition.
An accelerator?
The transition grant focuses on the quantum communication aspect that I just described, the long-distance link, and the EIC accelerator grant is for the modalities with QPUs.
And just to be complementary, because before the transition, you had earlier other
So
grants.
the co-founders of the company, me and my other co-founder, we had ERC grants, and not Pathfinders yet, but we'll surely apply with our academic positions. But yeah, so with Welinq we had transition and an accelerator, and before as academic, like what gave rise to this science that led to Welinq was supported by ERC grants.
Yeah, it's important to keep in mind that we have several instruments. So for ERC, Pathfinder, transition, and accelerator has happened a few times. Three instruments is more common, but it's designed that way. Thomas, you didn't have several instruments. You are a beneficiary of
only once, indeed.
Only once?
Yeah, the accelerator one. And IONX, my company, was the recipients of the accelerator program in March last year, 2024. If I may, maybe a few words about myself. So I'm the CEO of IONX that I joined about 2 years ago. Prior to joining IONX, I have kind of a double career. I started as an aerospace engineer, working for space companies for about 10 years. I worked with Arianespace, a French company. Then I worked with CNES, the French Space Agency. I worked a bit at NASA and also a bit at DLR in Germany and in the States. So gave me a good overview of the industry, obviously. And then I transitioned more to the business side. I worked at BCG for about 5 years in Paris, which I think was a good complement to my technical background, which allowed me then to step in the position. I was recruited by the co-founders of the company, CNRS, the French National Research Center, which we are going away from, but that was at the origin of the tech, and the startup studio Technofounders. IONX, the company I lead, is basically developing a new type of electric propulsion for small satellites with what we hope to be the most efficient propulsion system ever put in space for satellites. We launched our first thrusters a couple of weeks ago on Transporter 12, and we are now testing it for the first time in orbit as we speak. And we recently closed a Series A fundraise, 13 million euros, with the EIC in the frame of the accelerator program.
Maybe it's good to understand your innovator's journey, to start with Samira explaining slightly more about how it works. So how do we generate themes, and how can companies apply?
So if we focus on the accelerator, so how it works, where we have two different schemes in EIC for funding. One is, let's say, top-down approach, where we in EIC, together with the parent DGs, looking into the most important areas that Europe has to focus to make sure that we are in front of the deep tech. So that's where we identify challenges, and these challenges are published every year in our work program. So this is one approach. There is a dedicated budget, and the topic is identified in our work program. Then the other one is bottom-up, when any idea that is deep tech, high risk, high gain from the community, any topic, there is no thematic area, can come to us as an application, and they both will be treated the same. So that also has its own budget. So how it works, after you apply for Accelerator, you have a short submission, and this will be evaluated by the external evaluators, and you would know the results for a go or no go by 3 to 4 weeks. And if it's a go, you will be invited to submit a full proposal, which is a bit longer, and you have to submit a lot of more business details as well, and you have to explain more in detail your technology. Why is it a breakthrough, and why is it important, specifically for topics like quantum, space, semiconductors, the strategic part of it. Why is it important for the sovereignty of the Union, and so on? These are the topics that you should work on in your application. And it goes again to the external evaluators, and if they give a go to you, you will be invited to a jury interview. In the jury interview, you have usually 5 jury members that have technical background. Some of them have more business background. Then you have a program manager like me, and a representative of EIC fund, which is an EIB officer, and just wanting me, someone like me, and the EIB officers don't have a vote, but the juries have a vote. You will go through a presentation, a lot of questions, and so on, and after that you get a go or no go. And after that, for the investment part, still EIB will run some due diligence and some more details to check about your other investments and so on. So it's a complicated system, but I can guarantee you that so far it has been very beneficial, at least for certain ecosystems. We really got a name as a de-risker for many of the startups. Specifically, I can say in quantum, semiconductor, that it has been very beneficial for the startups to have our fund and to have our investment, and because the other investors that are looking into these technologies that are more difficult to understand when is the money going to come back, they trust it better to invest.
Eleni, come with us. I mean, how did you prepare yourself to prepare for the application? When did you say, okay, we will apply for transition, and how did you prepare yourself to apply for the accelerator?
Yes, so it's a very, I guess it's a kind of a natural path when we are in deep tech startup. Indeed, I would completely confirm that it's an incredible asset to be able to profit from this type of grants. Initially, so the company is relatively young, 2022. So initially, there were the funds that are like, so it's a French-based company, so we're very much helped by BPI, which is the investment bank, the public investment bank in France, so local things. We actually got also the Grand Challenge Award of Hello Tomorrow in 2023. I almost forgot to say. And then, it's kind of a natural process to say, okay, why don't we try the EIC transition initially? We thought we didn't go directly for the accelerator because we felt it was a little bit more progressive aspect. We were helped. We got help from there are companies that are also specialized in helping shape a bit, of course, what you write in your grant and the science and the technology in the TRL that you put in there is the companies, but there are companies that have some experience with this. The transition does not need an interview. So this was just, it was, you're right, but not in Brussels, sorry. It was, yes, absolutely, it was remote, yeah, while the accelerator is in Brussels, so it's a bit more,
Okay.
it feels more official. Yes.
But interesting, your company is 3 years old, so you are, let's say, very young on average.
Yeah.
The average age of the company applying for the accelerator is 7 years.
Yes.
How is your story? Are you 7 years old?
No, no,
As a
we are 4 years old now.
Okay, so it's also
Young
relatively
company,
young. And you went directly to the accelerator. You didn't do grants before.
Yeah. In fact, we went directly to the accelerator. So again, I think if we look at the start of the company, it was very well founded by French institutions at the beginning, CNRS obviously, but also the French Space Agency. I think like you, we also enjoyed very much the support of BPI. But then, so we got a certain amount of funding from the French government, and then at some point, we were looking outside to grow bigger on the international stage, on the European stage, because obviously space technologies are quite paramount for strategic development of Europe and also sovereignty, which is obviously a big topic these days. And so we were looking at what's available on the market, if I may say, and quite obviously the EIC accelerator is I think the biggest and the most important grant and equity support for deep tech founders in Europe. So it was quite obvious for us to apply to that program. I think we got extremely lucky to get it for the first time because it's very competitive.
Both first time.
The accelerator, yes. The
Yeah.
transition, second.
Okay. So that's an important lesson. Don't be discouraged.
Exactly, absolutely.
Try a second time if you think the first one was close
And
by.
I think if I may also comment on what has been said previously, I think the best way to prepare yourself for the application, beyond the pure scholar aspects of just writing something nice, is to have clarity on what your plan is and what are your goals. There is obviously the technical development, that's quite clear, but you also need to have a good vision commercially, industrially, from a human resource perspective. So I think if you have a good plan, if it's quite clear for the next 2-3 years, if when you do all the business plan and all that, you end up sometimes north of a few millions, then I think you are on a good path to apply.
But do you both say, even if you would not apply, you have to do that work anyway? Developing a business plan.
Yeah, but it
and all the
helps you. The
aspects.
fact that you are applying really puts you in the perspective, especially the business aspects, I agree. Strategic, market to go, all of these that are new for a company that is like 3 or 4 years old. It really, really helps a lot by talking to many people, practicing for the orals. For us, it was extremely helpful, the preparation. I don't think there is many situations where you are confronted to so good questions.
And could you both describe, let's say, the 3 success factors? These are the 3 things that really made us achieve successfully the whole application process.
I think it's first of all extremely solid technology. Okay, this is by far the most important, right? The core of what you are developing, and clear strategy, I would say, for the market. Convincing business plan. I don't know if Thomas agrees.
No, of course. I mean, it's quite obvious. It's always, whatever it is, public funding and private funding, it's always, the tech, the product, the market, and the story you can convey around those 3 factors to be convincing anybody, whether it is the EIC or private investors, in fact.
Samira, you have observed probably dozens of applications.
Yes.
So what are your do's and don'ts
I
to
think
see?
exactly what they're explaining is the jury wants to hear a really pure and great technology that is a breakthrough, because this is where we are. But I think besides what you mentioned, they always like to see your position in the market. One mistake that I have seen in some interviews that the startups are trying to ignore the competition. They just focus on the point that they are the best, and they don't mention any competition, any details of where are they struggling. Is there another global company that might have better chance to enter the market? These are the points that the jury members want to hear. I think this is very important, to have a clear vision of what is the competition for your technology, and how are you going to be better than the competition, or how are you going to put Europe in front of that competition. So this is a point that is very important. And another thing that I think is very important for the jury is very clear plan B. because they always say, if you don't get a EIC investment, what are you going to do? So that is also important because they want to know that you have a really good business vision and you don't put basically all your eggs in one basket. I think this is another important thing.
What happens afterwards? So you have done your jury, you leave, you don't get the result at the moment. What happens in the 2 or 3 weeks afterwards? Waiting
You're
for...
stressed?
Yeah.
You're waiting for the result?
No, I mean, you keep your business day as usual, right? I mean, it's, as you said, the EIC accelerator is one option, but you need a plan B, a plan C, and if you don't get it, that's right, there are other ways of funding. This one is quite interesting as well because it's a good label for private investors. They really like the EIC, and it's easier for private investors to back companies that are already backed by the EIC, so obviously it's very important, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, that's fine, and you keep on working.
And explain me also what happens. So you have done your jury, and probably 2 weeks later on a Monday you get an email. What happens then? So you are awarded. What happens after you're selected?
You drink champagne.
Okay. We're in France. Huh?
and then you start planning the next steps. So it's an extremely, obviously, as we all agree, I think it's an extremely important asset. Having the support for European companies, especially I'm insisting on this because especially in the present geopolitical situation, having the support from a European fund is it's extremely, honestly, precious. So we're trying, to avoid getting investments from too much outside, but it's not easy. It's not easy. So the support of EIB is. So you start making your plan, I guess, business plan for Welinq. It kind of kick-started the procedure starting about Series A. I think maybe that was the case for you as well.
Yeah, so I think in fact when we got the grant part, which is the first part of the EIC that you get, in a very short amount of time, once you get the go-ahead, which is extremely beneficial for us. But then after you get the grant, yes, if you keep working on a Series A, usually the EIC accelerators comes in a blended form. You get a grant plus an equity participation in your next fundraise. So in fact, once we get the grant, we started to work on the Series A due diligence with the EIC to make sure that our story is also convincing for an equity participation. So it's a few more months of planning, strategic vision, documentation, and convincing for the EIC to convince the EIC to join us also for the Series A.
And what happens in terms of VCs? Is the telephone red after you get awarded, or is it still hard work of getting in touch with investors?
It's always a hard work, but it's easier with the EIC for sure.
And why is it easier?
Because the due diligence, as you say, I think the EIC sees so many files, so many applications. They have a super deep understanding of every type of deep tech environment and sector. So the due diligence they work on either for the grant part or the equity part is so deep, and they have a lot of experts around the table investigated the tech, the market, the team, everything. So that once we get basically the stamp from the EIC committee and the EIC council, other investors see it as definitely as a stamp of very good value, especially for investors that are not specific to the sector. I work in a space business. There are not so many space specialist VCs. There are a few, but not that many. And there are many generalist VCs that want to get into the sector, but they lack the technical or the business acumen, specific business acumen on space to go in. And they heavily rely sometimes on administration, public administration or public committees such as the EIC one to basically do the diligence for them. So for us, for sure, it helped a lot on the Series A.
I have a question for Samira, but for the technique, I would like to see the QR code again, because I have not yet received any questions. So maybe it's useful to see that picture again. Samira, what starts with you when a round is evaluated? What is a program manager doing when the harvest is known?
So first, again, we also maybe open a champagne because, well, I know the answer, of course, immediately when they leave the room and the discussions with the juries. So when we have the list, first of all, we always share it also with the parent DGs so that they know for each basically thematic area of
What is a parent DG?
Okay, so as you know, European Innovation Council, EIC, is an executive agency. So we are not a policy agency, we are an executive agency. And we have 5 directorate generals that are in commission that are basically our parents in identifying our strategy and identifying the areas that we have to focus on and the budget and so on. So we have DG RTD, we have research and research, technology and development. We have DG Connect on digital topics. We have DG Grow, which is more on a single market, standardization, and so on. And then we have DG Budget and Regio.
But they have both different parents.
Yes.
Space.
Space is Grow, I guess, or RTD.
No space.
Quantum is Connect.
Yeah.
But
and just go further, because once you have the champagne and you have report to parent DGs, you form portfolios. So you have basically a grouping. How does it work?
So basically my portfolio is from Pathfinder to Transition Accelerator. But for the accelerator, I put basically the startups in that portfolio. I make sure that I have the connections with the project officers inside EIC who are taking care of each startup, and also the EIB officers who are taking care of the investments rounds and the due diligence and so on. So from there, it's a bit different way of working with projects. For instance, for Pathfinder, I have much more hands-on because they are early stage and we try to help them to get into the market. But startups are already in that path, and what I can do there is like inviting them to different events with investors. We call them investors dinners, for instance. That we organize usually close to bigger events. Like I had one in next to World of Quantum in Munich. So where we invite investors, we invite our startups to discuss for the rounds. And then we have also different things like the coaches that they can have for getting ready for their pitching and creating their next slide deck for the investors' pitches. So and also trying to encourage them to be more involved in, for instance, standardization or IP strategy, stronger IP strategy, and so on. So yeah,
and
that's how.
Have you already met the other companies in your portfolio?
You mean in the other quantum companies that? Oh yeah, of course, we know each other, and there is even partnerships.
Before you applied or after you applied?
Before and after.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're not. That
but
many. We have partnerships.
The
we know each other
ecosystem
very
is
well.
very particular because it's much more cohesive.
We know
and
it
companies
very
help
well.
each other. So generally in quantum, if you apply, you have at least 5 letters of support of your clients and your supplier. How is it in space?
Yeah, same thing. So I knew it's still a small, relatively small industry, so I knew most of them already. But I must also say that the EIC and the EIC program director in charge of space, Stella, I think she does a very good job in animating the ecosystem, and we see each other at conferences. We are invited to roundtables like that one all together, and I think that there are many synergies, whether it is commercial, strategic, or financial. So it's always good to nurture a particular relationship within that ecosystem.
Yeah.
I would say some startups are more eager, to be involved and be in the conferences and also join the webinars that we organize. And some, we were just talking about that before, some take the money and disappear because maybe, I don't know, they are not ready to be at that stage or something like that. But I think still for quantum, the ecosystem works very closely. There is competition, but still there is a lot of collaboration.
Synergies, yeah.
But Samira, just to pick up, do you see success factors that the ones who are more, let's say, collaborative sharing, inspired by others, do better than those who go alone? Or is that not?
I think it's a little bit cultural as well. I mean, I see, for instance, we are in Paris. I see all the startups I have in France, they are very open to collaborate with each other or collaborate with other startups in Netherlands and so on. But for instance, Germany has a lot of public fund, huge public fund for quantum. So I see less willingness from German startups to work with the others because they have their own, big ecosystem. So yeah, I think it's a bit different for different cultures.
Since we are in Paris, you're both, let's say, in the region of Paris based. I think that 8% of our beneficiaries are in the Ile-de-France, so it's the biggest concentration of companies. Is the region, or is the regional context, the geographical context, important for you? Of relying on?
Yeah, it has been extremely supportive. There's no question about it. We have been supported by the region, Ile-de-France region, heavily. Also, in the first stages of the company, and even today, with partnerships of different. So we're very much supported by the region and by the French government in general. Indeed, it works a bit differently than Germany because it's like more concentrated. So the funding comes directly from the government. It's not based in the land, and so for us, in our case, in the quantum case, there is a French quantum national strategy that has, of course, benefited the quantum industry a lot, especially in fields like quantum computing. And so, yes, so this creates an extremely favorable ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's same thing for us. I mean, so we are born here, raised here, and I think we will most likely remain in Ile-de-France for the next few years for many different reasons, but one of them being that the workforce here in Ile-de-France is very well fine-tuned with our need for the space industry. People might not know that, but at least half of the workforce working in the space business are in Ile-de-France. I think the other half is around Toulouse, most likely, but Ile-de-France is a strong region. The policymakers here in Ile-de-France, the regional policymakers are very supportive. They also invested in the company. So we have tight links with them. So yeah, definitely we're not going anywhere soon. I think the one topic that might be a bit difficult in this area is the real estate, especially when you are trying to build an industry with some heavy machines, and you need to have influx, inbound, outbound, and think about your production logic. I think it's a little bit more difficult in a tight space as Ile-de-France, but that's also something that the region is trying to work on and improve the situation.
Samira, do you see other logics of, let's say, companies setting up subsidiaries somewhere else to get talent or to get production conditions?
I think it mainly because quantum specifically is very much linked to the science and universities, is usually a spin-off from university, and they usually stay in the same region. What I have seen, most of them, they open a business office in another location, even in US, because they want to make sure that, or in some cases in Canada, they're trying to build also some infrastructure, bigger land, and maybe easier to facilitate some fabrication. But I would say in general, they stay in their own country as long as possible.
You touched to a sensitive one, moving to the US. So the EIC is partly developed to avoid that. And it's quite successful. 94% of beneficiaries remain in Europe. But is that a temptation to be moving to the US, or having US investors having certain demands?
US investors is a bit more specific, but moving to the US, I don't think it's a temptation. I think in the space business, it's almost mandatory at some point, because the biggest part of the space market is still in the US. That being said, there are different ways to have a US presence. I think for us at the beginning, it will most likely be just a pure commercial entity, where you have commercial specialists that knows the US space markets and have good entry points within the administrations. Whether or not you want to develop an industrial footprint is a different question, because then you need to protect your IP. But I'm a strong supporter of sovereignty when it comes to space tech, and if we are successful at some point, I want the company to stay in France and to stay in Europe. I think it's a bit easier for our competitors in the States, because they have the advantage of having not only the biggest market, but they have also more capital and skilled workforce, and they have everything in one place. They have the market, the capital, and the tech. Us in Europe, we have probably a tech that is as good as what's in the US. We have workers that are as skilled as in the US, but we are a bit lagging behind, and I'm not going to surprise anybody, but we are a bit lagging behind in terms of capital and in terms of market. That's why it's a temptation for us at some points to cross the Atlantic.
Yeah, the
Eleni?
way I see it for quantum, maybe not yet, like what Thomas said, is that the market in space is mandatory to go. For the moment, for me, I don't see it as mandatory yet to open an office in the US. There is, of course, some companies that are a little bit older than Welinq that have opened. It's more in Canada. I would say Canada is attracting more people in quantum than the US. But the very first question that comes into the US investment, and I think because, as Thomas said, there is simply a lot more capital, despite all the efforts of the EIB and everything that we try here, there's just a lot more. So I see already, like, for example, competitors from the UK that have a little bit more because of the, like historical relationship, more easy access to US investors. They have an advantage. A comparative advantage because they have easier access to US investments. And I think there is, of course, now more and more alternatives from Asia, for example. There's quite a bit of investment coming from Asia now. So for the moment, for Welinq, we're trying to stay with European investment, but the question will come on the table, and the question is what you do then. That's it.
And I think if I also may comment, I mean, my statement was maybe reflecting what I was thinking maybe a couple of months ago. But
What happened?
Yeah, exactly. So it's obviously a moving target, and we need to revisit. Maybe the space market, the US space market, will completely close in a few weeks and months, and we'll be happy to stay here. And it might actually become a competitive advantage to be European versus being American at some point. But it remains to be seen.
We're strongly attached to sovereignty, I have to say, in quantum as well. This is for sure. Yeah, but we don't want to close any borders as well. For the tech, it would be good.
You're relatively, I see, young in our portfolio. What happens to companies that are 2 or 3 years in the portfolio? The early ones, let's say, because the instrument is quite new. It's only 5 years old.
You mean about the investment and the moving?
No, in terms of how to develop, what are their needs?
Oh, okay. So, yeah, they always come to this point that they really need money for scale-up, either for production, having their own fabrication line, or just increasing the number of their engineers and so on. So we have quite a good number of startups that reach that level, that they really need a big ticket to scale up. And that's where the bigger problem comes, because the big ticket in Europe is very different from US. One of the former UK companies that moved to US a few years ago raised 1.3 billion euros in 4 years or 5 years. This is like a dream, never come true in Europe, because I see our startups struggling for a ticket of 10 million or 20 millions. So unfortunately, some of our startups are struggling for that scale up. And now EIC has this new instrument called STEP, which is for bigger tickets, the tickets of 10 to 30 million. And this is for a round of 50 to 150 million euros. And this is for the moment, we are committed to do it until 2027. There is a budget, 900 million euros allocated, each year 300 million euros. And it's a much faster, let's say, a scheme than accelerator. We try to do the evaluation and everything every 3 months. So we make sure that we don't stop startups at certain points, because their rounds of investment might depend on what we are doing and the decision. So we try to do it very quickly. Now, actually, as we speak, the first bunch of interviews are happening for the first ever STEP initiative. And I think this is a very good start, but still the budget is quite limited for the number of very good startups that we have in deep tech.
Yeah, I'm Dutch, and a step in Dutch is a trottinette, a small bicycle. So it's a good start, but it's not a rocket yet. And I think it was Macron who was mentioning in his Sorbonne speech in April that we have every year 600 billion euros of European savings invested in the US. So the biggest shift is not people moving to the US to move, but our savings moving to the US. So if we can reinvest those in Europe, that would be an interesting avenue. What do you see others as, let's say, challenges coming up? You mentioned finding the right space to work in, where you can combine an office and a factory. What do you see as things we can help you in the coming 2 years?
Yes, scale up, I think a bit more specifically, I think when it comes to deep tech, it's the time to market, because we are all working on difficult technologies, whether it is space propulsion or quantum, or those technologies takes years to develop. You might do quick prototype, a quick MVP, you can put stuff in space, test things in your lab, but between this and something you can really market broadly and gain market shares on your domestic market in the States and actually make a living out of whatever you developed, I think it takes a lot of time. At the beginning, I think you don't really realize it, but then, yeah, it's going to take some years, and we need to get the financing there for us. I don't know if it's STEP or if it's 10 million, 20 million, or maybe just 2 million, but we need people that are able to support us in the long run, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if we still need it. Hopefully, I don't wish to rely on external capital in that time frame, but if it needs to be done, I hope that public institutions in France and Europe will be there to support us, because it takes some time.
I could not be more aligned. Yeah, I completely agree. These are technologies that take time. We cannot be expected to sell thousands of these products next year. It's not possible. So we need support in the long run, and private investors often have this problem. They expect immediate return, and so some of them are more open, but it's tough. It's not easy.
No, the challenge is, we invest on average. Let's say the objective is to stay 5 to 10 years in the equity of a company, so it's patient capital. The challenge, of course, is to get VCs with the same patience. So one of the things we have built up is a trusted investor network that basically underwrite that principle. The other things, I don't know, have you still used the business acceleration services? So that to connect two corporates, is it something you have used already?
Yeah, a little bit, yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to space, there is also a bit of a chicken and an egg problem, where you're trying to sell some space hardware, but you're still a young company, so you cannot demonstrate that it works perfectly like an Airbus or a Thales or an OHB can do, right? Mm-hmm. You don't have the same technical maturity, but the customer expects you to have the same maturity. So they will not buy your product unless you demonstrate that level of reliability. But if you don't sell your product, it's not going to fly. So if it doesn't fly, you will never be able to demonstrate that you're reliable. So the space business has also that type of complexity, but the European Commission is also helping on this, because they came up with some framework where they finance some flight tickets, where they basically buy a mission to a satellite manufacturer, whether it is a small one or a big one, and in return, those manufacturers have to bring on board some payloads, some equipments like ours at IONEX. So it's also another great way in which the European Commission is contributing.
If I may add, I want to say exactly as you mentioned, one other support that the public sector can do is these public procurements, to make sure that we are creating kind of market for the startups. And for quantum, at least we have the Euro HPC, I think it's, and also Euro QCI, where we are basically having announcements for this and that location. For instance, Barcelona wants to have in the supercomputing centers, they need a quantum computer to do hybrid computing. Then this public procurement will go out, and then companies apply. And so far, I think 6 or 7 have already successfully done that. It's a very good help, and also it shows the public sector, the private sector, that this is really going to happen. But I still think the private sector, at least for quantum, big industries in Europe are so slow to get involved, because I think they can do a lot. First of all, of course, I know some companies, they're already collaborating with our startups, but the huge efforts of, for instance, pharmaceuticals, like they do it in US, or maybe automotives in Europe, to really say, okay, quantum computers, for instance, are going to be solving some this and that problem, identifying some specific problem, creating a challenge, and basically make a market for the startups to work on that. I think we have to push in that direction more. We cannot just rely on the money that we are going to invest. We have to create a market. We have to look into the revenue that the startups can have.
Just to be sharper on that, on my first working day, 1st of June 2023, the commissioner said, Mr. Scheffer, the old industry is not delivering. You have to create a new one. Is that the solution, or is the solution to organize better marriages between the young challengers and the old established ones?
To me, it's a continuum. At least in the space, I don't
Everyone
see.
dies, yeah.
I don't, but I don't see a war between startups and larger corporations. I think it's a continuum where you have startups disrupting some models, coming up with new technologies. Then you have small businesses that are some kind of in between, and then the larger corporations. But I think there is a space and a market for everybody. I think, to me, the valid question is how do we make small companies and larger corporations work together, and that's where it's a little bit of a challenge, in my opinion, because today, if you force, for example, large corporations to work with startups, they will try to look on their actual business cases and their actual platforms, technologies, to complement what they already have with technologies that are mature enough, but that still fits their legacy business model, if you wish. But if you have something very innovative on a different use case, different service, it's also hard for them to understand how it can fit in which model, which program, and how to found all of this. And I think that's where, again, public institution can play a large role by defining programs that provide opportunities for big players and smaller players to collaborate. For the IRI², for example, constellation program that is supposed to be the competitor from Starlink, but in Europe, could be a good example of that. If we find some smart way to basically save a part of this big budget for smaller players to interact with the big ones, and it is still a challenge in the space industry today.
We have still 3 minutes. I haven't received any question yet, so really, if you have something urgent, please come up forward. Otherwise, I will fill the time. But please, if you have things. Just one thing that is often in newspapers, that America innovates and Europe regulates. Is that something you see, or that's, let's say, one of these urban legends?
That's not something I see.
Yeah, okay. Me neither. No. I'm supporting regulation European style.
Because?
Because I think regulation does not hinge on innovation necessarily, if it's well done. I hear that in some fields, not in quantum and space, I think yet, maybe there is a bit of an over-regulation, which makes it a bit stringent, too many, and it takes a lot of admin efforts in the companies to actually comply to all the methods. So maybe there is some simplification to be done, but deregulate, no.
But do you deal with regulation on, let's say, the products and the markets you want to address, or the regulation of setting up a corporation, tax issues, employment issues?
Both. I think we can consider all types of regulation. What is very important and discussed a lot in quantum right now is, of course, export controls, supply chains. These are, I'm sure the space industry has the same issues. So these are policy topics that are extremely deep under debate today. Maybe there is not a single easy solution, because for sovereignty issues you want, of course, to do some control to support your industry, European industry. At the same time, you cannot completely stop the flux of goods, and it's not good for the general innovation and the flow of information. So yeah, finding a good equilibrium will be one of the major topics of policy makers, I think, in the next few years.
And it's indeed a topic in the next year. So also we as an EIC board have a task since a month to report to the Commission on regulatory barriers experienced by the 700 companies we fund.
Can also be some kind of opportunity sometimes. I'll give you an example. In the US, actually, they regulated space debris earlier than we did in Europe. So the FCC passed a law a couple of years ago that forces operators to deorbit the spacecraft within 5 years after operational lifetime.
In the space above the US, or?
All around.
Okay.
It is an opportunity for us because our thrusters, our product, our engines is basically used to deorbit. So that regulation is good for us because it will allow us to sell more product one day. So this is an opportunity, and we hope that actually the European Commission that is currently working on a space law can work on such topic and provide a framework so we all in the space industry know what are the boundaries and the constraints with which we can play and develop services and business cases.
Yeah, for example, in AI, like the AI, I participate just because I know these topics quite well. I participate in a think tank that is feeding policy briefs to the G7 for AI and quantum. And I would say that, for example, the AI Act of the EU honestly serves as a model a bit worldwide as something where for ethical and responsible innovation. And I think we have to do the same in quantum, in space. And these are not topics that are minor. And I do not agree that they block innovation. So I think we should. Yeah.
I think it's an important message that basically regulation is also to protect consumers, safety, environment. We are going to close this session. If you have any questions afterwards, well, we are available, at least Samira and I are publicly available, so you can send us emails or through LinkedIn, so please connect through LinkedIn. And we address a number of themes of having in mind if you want to apply, or if you face barriers in your growth, please think of us. Thank you for being with us. We're going to have a shift of panels.
Thank you.
So I thank my guests here, and we move on to the next panel. I stay, but I change place.